Everything dies eventually, and the death of Path of Exile 2's Triumphant 0.3 update is imminent. Maybe you played it, maybe you didn't. PoE2, the Third Edict, added huge systems and excellent changes to the game, like the long-awaited inclusion of automated trading and a complete trade UI in the game client that released with zero problems, and a speedy way to traverse with a great risk-reward ratio, sprinting, which may still have some clunk associated, or maybe it's just a skill issue. But 0.3.0 wasn't without disastrous failures for Path of Exile 2. Game performance is at an all-time low, and the future of game balance in the lead-up to 1.0 remains shaky. Deadeyes, watch out. Need we even touch on visual clarity? Yeah, I think we will. Fortunately, a suite of new entertainers in this space are making that wait for PoE2's forthcoming official launch extremely enjoyable, either with crazy events and farming strategies, or just straight fire video essays about Path of Exile 2. We're gonna highlight them all. Welcome to the final State of Path of Exile 2 0.3 Rise of the Abyssals, the Third Edict video. I absolutely swear it's the last one. It is only the third one, or maybe the fourth one. Anyways, timestamps below. Like, subscribe, comment, Patreon. Let's go. Where must we begin, my fellow exiles? Of course, it's with asynchronous trade being added to Path of Exile 2 and probably Path of Exile 1 very soon. Long have we waited for trade to actually be in the game itself and not have to rely on using the outdated method of going, finding another player, and actually trading with them in the flesh. Now, we can set up our own shops and our hideouts and sell items even while we're off sleeping next to our... This is by far the biggest win of the patch and assist players of all types, unless you're playing solo self-found, and in that case, well, I'm telling you, you are missing out on some swift progression. Come on, you know you want to be done with the league in 2 weeks, or if you're like me, 2 months, because you don't have a lot of time to play. Another note on the trading front, this launched into the game without a single snafu. Nothing went wrong, there were no abuse cases, nobody lost their items, there wasn't a terrific trade scandal, it just worked. And aside from some extra quality of life flourishes that I hope grinding your games continues to add in 0.4.0 and beyond, it works super well. I have no complaints. It's way smoother than using the trade site in my opinion, and it was just a big fat W. Another one we got to talk about right now is the new campaign content. Act 4 and the interlude acts also were just excellent. Act 4, while it was quite easy, is probably the tightest act in Path of Exile 2. I thought Act 1 could not be overcome, but Act 4 did it. I think if there's some extra balancing going on with the actual Act 4 bosses to make them a little bit more challenging on that first run through, it's going to be my favorite act by far. The entire element of skipping from island to island, all these disparate environments, encountering the Karui, finding out what the Third Edict is, and actually seeing Sin succumb to some terrible illness as we enter those interludes, all excellent. I do think there could be a little bit more build up to the Tavakai fight and him being the act boss, but maybe there will be some payoff in Act 5 once we finally enter Oriath and hopefully encounter Oriana and the rest of the Twilight Order. Yeah, that cat's out of the bag. Now, we all know we're going to Oriath. That Act 4 end of cutscene, whew, very nice. And the interludes, while they're only a temporary portion of the game, I think they went in quite smoothly and they were actually quite enjoyable. They actually make me think about a future where in Path of Exile 2, for those of us who don't want to run the campaign over and over, has a system in which you just go through a bunch of interludes. These interludes, they don't include a lot of dialogue. You're able to move through them quite swiftly. Maybe there's 12 or 13 or 14 you got to work through, and they're just content, just the combats, just the encounters, revamped areas from the campaign with that campaign feel, just not as much dialogue you gotta skip through on those subsequent runs. I think that would be an elegant way to implement a sort of campaign skip into Path of Exile 2 eventually, or we could just see all the interludes completely fade into nothingness once we get Acts 5 and 6 added to Path of Exile 2, which I truly think would be a shame. 3 more wins to go over before we talk about the losses, everyone. And the first is the rise of the Abyssals. This League mechanic, the revamped Abyss from Path of Exile 1, slotted into Path of Exile 2 very well. The monsters are cool. The only thing that's a little troubling are the modifiers associated with those rares and the on-death explosions and the green on green on green. The actual mechanic of your maps being overrun with these abyssal creatures, it's sometimes leading to an abyssal depth, having the omens that drop, the bones that you use to craft onto your items, and it being very deterministic and just giving you a way to power up your character as you're leveling through the axe and into the endgame. It was all just a very feel-good mechanic. Then it also added a suite of boss fights to the game, of which I didn't get to encounter too many times. I do think those are a little bit too rare for my liking. I also think the Vessel of Kulamak, the pinnacle boss for Abyss, could use a little bit of a rework if he stays in the game with 0.4. That fight is frustrating as all heck as a melee character with puddles constantly falling onto the ground. It once again incentivizes that one-shot mentality of I need to kill this pinnacle boss before I have to deal with these puddles that are just a frustrating game mechanic to deal with. I understand something like the Shaper in Path of Exile 1, having the puddles that you can manage yourself and enough arena space to slot them into different corners and be very strategic with how you're dealing with them. But in the Vessel of Kulamak fight, it is just messy and unfun. Don't worry guys, we'll talk about performance and the issues with Abyss and performance in the next part of the video. Big win number 4 for Path of Exile 2 0.3 is the addition of Sprint. This just makes the game feel better. Okay, you move faster, you have to be strategic with the way you use it. It has a great risk versus reward ratio. Initially, I thought it was extremely clunky to use, and they did make a few tweaks to it that made it feel a tad better. And at this point, I've mastered Sprint. I'm not getting heavy stunned anymore. I understand when I can use it, where I can use it, what monsters to use it against, and what monsters to not use it against. I'm using it in the campaign, in Endgame, and there are only a few specific areas where I never use Sprint, mostly in delirium maps in which I can't really see the ground, because sometimes you're sprinting over top those little puddles in delirium maps and those monsters pop out and they will instantly heavy stun and kill you. Those are the only scenarios in which I have to be careful using Sprint. Everywhere else, man, I can strategically just weave through maps with ease. People who haven't played Path of Exile 2 since Sprint's edition, or only played through the campaign once with the initial implementation of Sprint, I'm telling you, you have no idea how powerful it is. Once you master it, you're actually moving through the campaign at a rapid pace. Just give it until 0.4, give it a go. Now that you've had your hands on Sprint quite a bit, I know you probably won't want to run through the campaign again. A lot of you want to skip the campaign, but with Sprint, you are traversing those areas at an extremely quick pace. And if you really want to run past certain monsters, you can do that. And then the final W of the patch, in my opinion, is the updating of Endgame in 0.3.1, the first and only big patch happening within 0.3.0. This revamped Endgame, essentially removing the way towers worked before, where you need to use tablets in towers, and it applies to all the maps in a radius around the tower. Now you use tablets on maps themselves, and you apply the mechanics directly to the maps. Towers are just used for scouting and getting more tablets. That's cool. You also have boss fights in every single map now. That's also awesome. This shift of needing to hunt rare monsters to needing to kill the boss to complete a waystone, big fan of it. I love the boss fights in Path of Exile 2. Now it really seems like you have the zoomy nature of clearing out the maps in Endgame with all the packs, and then you have these epic boss fights at the end of maps, especially those with powerful map bosses. The bosses actually fight back, and they are quite tanky, even if you have a decent build. So you're in these fights for a little while, you're struggling a little bit, you're actually dying to the bosses now, you need to engage with their mechanics, and I am a huge fan of that. I am quite interested to see how this will play out from a fresh start scenario in Trade League, with all the new changes to how tablets work and currency drops and all this. How is progression going to be? Is it going to be much harder now that you need to overcome these bosses on your builds to progress through the initial atlas? Most likely. I'm excited to give it a go though in 0.4. Now we need to talk about the terrific losses that hopefully will lead to wins in the long term. The number one problem with the game isn't balance, everyone. It is performance. Oh my goodness, has performance plummeted with the release of this league. Between crashes that are occurring to many people, to FPS drops, to just not being able to actually play the game because it's so blurry or there are issues going on, it's happening to unprecedented numbers of people, at least vocal people on the internet, and it's also happening to me, my dad, my brother, my wife, my brother-in-law. Everyone I know has struggled with performance this league, and they weren't struggling in prior leagues. And we're also seeing lots more complaints bubble up about needing a NASA level computer, or your computer turning into the actual furnace for your house when you're playing, or seeing people on consoles unable to play the Endgame at all. So what is the source of this problem? What's happening here? Well, a lot of people will initially point to Abyss. Abyss adds lots of monsters to your map, it adds lots of visual effects to your map, and that is overloading whatever system you are using to play the game. And that's totally true. Every time I walk into an Abyss area, my performance tanks, my FPS just goes zoop down. That happens to almost everybody I see, and I have a 4090 top of the line AMD, 64 gigabytes of RAM. I've got everything. I am still suffering on my computer here. I can only imagine those with low to mid-spec PCs and those on consoles feel when they're encountering crazy cool abyssal encounters. Then we also have a bunch of backend changes that happened with Path of Exile 2 with this update. They completely rewrote the renderer. That's probably where a lot of the crashes are coming from. And then sourcing back to the actual abyssal monsters, lots more loot is dropping on the ground again, so we have tons of items on the floor that is cluttering the performance. Remember, every item that is within your filter that shows that contributes to your PC running worse, your console running worse. And while Path of Exile 2 was initially pitched as a game that would not need a loot filter, those days are long gone, and we're not even 1 year into the release of PoE2. Honestly, you couldn't even run without a loot filter once you hit Endgame in 0.10 back in December of last year. So that right there is the number one thing that grinding gear games needs to resolve by 0.4 in the future. I know a few of you will say, oh, it's an early access title, what do you expect? Well, I expect them to move forward, not backward, and it's been kind of unfortunate. They haven't really addressed this issue head on yet. Now, it's been like this for a long time in Path of Exile 1, where of course you can juice to the absolute maximum. Well, in Path of Exile 2, that's happening again. And it's even on the lower end of stuff. You don't even need to juice a lot to see worse performance because there's so many more things happening on screen in Path of Exile 2. So many more visual effects. The graphics are obviously better. There's, cooler monster designs going on. You're doing more things with more different effects. The performance in PoE2, in my case, is much worse than in Path of Exile 1 for my playstyle of kind of elking and going. These performance issues aren't just affecting the Giga Juicers like my friend Snoobe85. It's hitting us all, and I hope GGG tries to resolve it ASAP. Okay, the other big L of 0.3 is just balance. That's it, guys. This was pitched as being a buff patch to pretty much everything, and while many archetypes and classes and skills were buffed or reworked, we're still feeling that dead-eye superiority. We're still seeing the supremacy of ranged classes. We're seeing spells fall a little bit behind unless you're playing a blood mage and unless you're losing a reap. We still have melee feeling a little bit left out because of the absolute visual clutter, the on-death effects ongoing, the degens on the ground. Balance is in a whack state, and honestly, I know what they tried to do with 0.30 was try to get everything in a good state before adding something like the Druid or the Templar or Swords and the Duelist to the game, but I really don't think that's going to happen until they get everything into the game. This was one of those patches where they said, we're not adding a new class, we're not adding a bunch of new skills or archetypes, we're just going to go back and try to work on prior things. And while they did solve some problems, like armor, for example, I still think with every single patch, we're just going to get a slew of new issues, and they need to completely cook that soup until they start to curate it and make it balanced. And honestly, let's be real, guys. Is a game like Path of Exile 2 or Path of Exile 1 for that matter, or Diablo 4, Last Epoch, all these ARPGs, are they ever truly balanced? Let me know in the comments below. Can you name a game, a state, a patch of a game like this that's so complicated that has ever been balanced? I'm really curious. Everybody wants balance. Grinding Your Games wants balance. But I'm starting to think, is that a possibility? Okay, the glazing and the hating is over. Now, I just thought it would be kind of cool to end the state of 0.3 with a shout out to some new or just cool content creators in the Path of Exile 2 space that have really sprung up in this patch. Top of the list for me, and I don't follow his guides or anything, but he put on such a cool event. I just need to have him here at the pinnacle. It's X the Farmer X. My boss actually told me about this guy back when he did his Zero to Mirror series and the launch patch of Path of Exile 2, and ever since, this dude has been grinding, putting out currency farming guides, item crafting guides, all this sort of stuff onto his channel. And just recently, he created this awesome event in which mirror tier builds had to overcome this giga juiced map boss. It started with the Shark Boy, then it went to Geonor, and it ended with everybody's favorite, the Tornado Bird of C Notes. And that entire video, the clips from it, the highlights, was just so entertaining. Highly recommend you go check out X the Farmer X, if not for his currency and crafting item build guides, then for his stream hijinks and the events he's likely going to put on into the future. Also planning on having him on the Still Sane podcast with 0.4. The next guy, I've only seen 3 of his videos, but all 3 have been bangers. They are video essays about ARPGs and Path of Exile 2. It's Young Wadok, okay? He has released probably my top 5 favorite Path of Exile video the past week here. Path of Exile 2 is for casuals. It's a breakdown of how PoE2 isn't that complex, and you should totally give it a go, even if you seem intimidated by it at first. He puts everything so eloquently and in such an easy to ingest way for beginners or people who haven't even touched a game like Path of Exile 2 before. I cannot recommend it enough. The sound design is top notch. The memes are great. Got my friend Cal in there a few times. Go check him out, sub to the channel, watch that video, highly recommend. The third guy has been on my radar for a little bit. He started a rival podcast to the Still Sane one. His name is Blazeworks TV. He is a hardcore solo self-found streamer, content creator who's put out a few cool video essays on PoE as a whole, both PoE1 and PoE2, and he hosts the Passive Tree podcast. Great podcast, good listen. You can turn that on, listen to people chat about games and their life for a few hours. Has an episode every week or so. I've been introduced to a multitude of smaller content creators by Blaze, and it's always a joy watching some of those hardcore solo self-found streams as well. If you haven't heard of him, haven't seen him, make sure you go check him out. All these channels are in the description, by the way. And finally, you've heard of him before. I've talked about him before, but he is making some of the best edited challenge runs in Path of Exile 2, maybe the only challenge runs right now in Path of Exile 2. His name's Schwingy. You know him. He is doing these wheel spins for Path of Exile 2, and he does a run from beginning to end, killing the Arbiter of Ash, edited into a 45 to 50 minute video with tons of jokes, lots of cool edits, these great moments that he's going through on his journey. He's not streaming any of it. He's doing it all in private and putting out a polished, beautiful product. These videos are getting hundreds of thousands of views, but I just thought if you hadn't heard of him, go check him out as well. He's been my friend for a while. The first person I met in the flesh and played Path of Exile 2 with, right seated next to me in LA. Really love how his videos have been popping. Make sure you give him a go. So there it is, the final State of 030 video. I think Grinding Your Games is in a perfect position to see both Path of Exile 2 and Path of Exile 1 succeed. Of course, we have the next PoE1 update 3.27 hitting on Halloween, October 31st. It is Keepers of the Flame. It looks interesting. I will actually be trying it out. Maybe I'll bounce by Act 4 again. Maybe I'll play all the way to Endgame and I'll have my soul sucked away from me by grinding your games once more. We'll just have to find out. Are you going to be trying PoE1's new update? Are you going to keep playing PoE2? Did you not play this patch, but you wanted to hear the whole breakdown of what's going on? Make sure you let me know in the comments below. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Like, comment, subscribe, Patreon, and I will see you in the next video. Have fun and stay sane.